people? Today we're going to be talking about Butcher's Crossing by John Williams, who is officially one of my favorite authors now. I read Stoner by John Williams last year, and it easily became one of my favorite books. And now I finally got around to reading another one of his. He only has 4 books published. This being one of them, and all of them are they're not they're really different. One of them, Stoner, is like a academic book about a professor. This one's a Western. He has another one called Augustus about the Roman Empire, and then I thought he only had 3 books, but looking into it, there's another one that just got reissued called Nothing But the Night, and they're all by NYRB. They always have really good covers. But yeah, so I plan on reading all of his books eventually. I want to get to Nothing But the Night first, and then Augustus last. Augustus is considered his masterpiece, as his magnum opus, but I haven't really ever been super into like Roman Empire stuff, so we'll see where that goes. But anyways, moving on. This was published in 1960, and John Williams was born in 1922. He passed away in 1994. He was born and raised in Texas, worked in radio and newspapers. He before joining the war effort, where in 1942, where he spent 2.5 years in India and Burma. After the war, he moved to Denver, attended DU, and received his bachelor's and master's in English, and then received his PhD in Missouri, and then returned to DU, where he taught for 30 years and was the director of creative writing. And then he retired in Arkansas. So you can kind of see in his books, like especially in Butcher's Crossing and Stoner, he writes about Missouri and Denver a lot. And so Butcher's Crossing is, I believe it's a made-up town in Kansas in the 1870s, which is right outside of Missouri. And then in Stoner, he's a professor in Missouri, and so you kind of can see the correlation between that. But about Butcher's Crossing, the best way to describe this for me was, I kind of called it a literary Western, and the reason for that being is Westerns are meant for, adventure, action, meant to be entertaining. Although this is entertaining, it wasn't necessarily written for entertainment. There's a lot of underlying themes, and it just speaks volumes. And I mean, it makes sense. He's a literature professor. And also, it has a little bit of dash of horror. I wouldn't say full-on horror, but kind of like a literary Western with horror elements in it. Because in the middle of it, you really just don't know how things are going to pan out, and you get so attached to these guys. And so, the book, what is it about? There are 4 main characters, and the protagonist, Will Andrews, who they call Andrews throughout the book, quits Harvard right before he graduates after reading some Emerson or Thoreau. I can't remember. I always get those guys mixed up. I believe it was Thoreau, about finding yourself in nature, and so he decides to pack all his stuff in a suitcase and go to Kansas, where he has an uncle who's in the bison hide trade business. And so it opens up with him like on the train getting into Butcher's Crossing, and I just now realized the story starts with him getting into Butcher's Crossing and then ends with him leaving Butcher's Crossing. But so it makes sense why it's called that. But but yeah, so he meets his uncle, and his uncle like immediately gives him a job, um, and he's just like, I don't know if I want to do that. I kind of just came out here to explore the western frontier and really see nature for its like wild self. And he has all this money saved up that he brought with him, and and he decides he wants to go on a bison hunting trip to see the land and experience the world in nature. And so he gets a suggestion from his uncle of who's like the person he should um, connect with. And this guy is, I'm blanking on his name right now. His name is Miller. His last name is Miller, and that's what they call him throughout the book. So he meets Miller in town, and they like strike a plan to go on this big hunt. And Miller's only rule is that he's in charge of everything. And Andrews has the money, and Miller has all the experience, and he pretty much just takes all of Will Andrews' money and goes and buys a bunch of oxen and horses and a wagon, and finds two other people to go on the trip with him. One of them is Charlie Hodge, who only has one hand, and he's hired for the domestic work. He makes the dinners, like does all the camp things, just does everything. So all the other guys have to do is go out for the hunt and come back. And he's also really religious, as none of the other guys are. He holds on to the Bible for dear life throughout the whole story. And then the other character is Schneider. And they all go by their last names except for Charlie Hodge. He goes by his full name for some reason. And Schneider is the only one that doesn't really want to do it. He keeps on telling Miller this is a bad idea and that like he doesn't want to be a part of it, but Miller pretty much just like forces him into it because he was getting paid. So they end up, all four of them get together and they decide to go on this trip. And so the book is broken up into three parts. The first part is Andrews getting to Butcher's Crossing and meeting these guys and setting up the plan. The second part is them on their trip, and then the third part is them getting back and just all the changes that has happened. And I don't want to really tell you any more besides that because there's definitely some twists and turns that I wasn't expecting, and I think going into it not knowing where it's going to go will be a better experience. And so if you're interested in a Western this pacing kind of reminds me of Steinbeck, where it's like real life pacing. It feels like the pacing of actual time. Like you feel their weariness and like their exhaustion, and you can feel the days go by with them. And it's just honestly one of my favorite types of writing, and he's one of my favorite writers now. But yeah, so if you're interested in some beautifully written sentences about a Western and exploring the Western frontier in the 1870s, he does go into gruesome detail of hunting the bison and all that comes with that. So if you're a little queasy when it comes to that stuff, bear that in mind. But that's really like the only thing that someone couldn't really handle in this. But yeah, and I forgot to write down some quotes, but usually I star them, so if I can find one really quick, that would be great. Let's see. Oh, here's one. He pulled away. Oh wait, no, I don't read that part actually. But yeah. Oh wait, here's one. Alright. Okay, this is like when he first gets into Butcher's Crossing and is like experiencing like real wild nature for the first time. During the night, he was awakened several times by sounds not quite identified on the edge of his sleeping mind. During the periods of wakefulness, he looked about him and in the total darkness could not perceive the walls, the limits of his room, and he had the sensation that he was blind, suspended in nowhere, unmoving. He felt the sounds of laughter, the voices, the subdued thumps and greetings, the jinglings of bridle bells and harness chains, all proceeded from his own head, and rolled around there like wind in a hollow sphere. Once he thought he heard the voice, then the laughter of a woman very near, down the hall in one of the rooms. He lay awake several moments, listening intently, but he did not hear her again. So, this is while he's waiting for Miller to get back with all of his equipment, and he just ends up laying in his hotel room for hours, or not hours, for days, in complete darkness, just waiting. So yeah, if you're interested, I would definitely check it out. If you don't want to read Butcher's Crossing, I definitely suggest Stoner. Everybody that reads it says it's like one of their favorite books. And yeah, thanks for checking it out.